Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Victoria Pelletier to the show. Victoria is an accomplished executive. She was a COO at age 24, has had a long career of been called the turnaround queen and the CEO whisperer. And so she's very accomplished in the area of leadership. She's a keynote speaker and she is an author. Her latest book is called Influence Unleashed. And she also has a book called Whole Human Leadership. And so today we'll talk about those topics as well as personal branding and what things look like as in the workplace as technology impacts us and as things unfold. So it's my pleasure to welcome Victoria Pelletier to the show. Welcome to the Eye of Power podcast. I'm your host, Tom Dardick. But this podcast is not about me. It's about you and your power. It's time to claim yours. Welcome, Victoria. Appreciate you appearing on the Eye of Power podcast with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
You're very welcome. So let's just start in on what areas that you have become expert in, and you have a very celebrated career path. And so I think there's a lot people can learn from. One of the things that I was thinking about, I think a lot about it, is personal branding and what that really means in terms of how we think about ourselves, how we communicate about ourselves, and maybe strategies we take as it relates to our career. So I'd just like to start maybe with a broad conversation around that and see where it goes.
Awesome. Yeah, happy to. Personal branding, I think I've been heavily engaged in managing my brand for 20 something years, even though, Tom, I don't think I had the vernacular 20 something years ago to call it that. But I made a shift from banking, the B2C world of operations, into B2B professional services. And it was at that moment where started to, I was accountable for, our sales and our revenue and, receiving RFPs and the way we go to conferences. So I started to think at that point, like, how do we differentiate the company? But that's a corporate brand strategy, but the individuals. People do business with people that they like and they trust and therefore want to do business with. So it became about how do my sales and client management team and myself, like, how do we differentiate ourselves? That's where the journey started.
Okay.
And I actually attribute a lot of career success that I've had to the fact that I have a very strong brand. And I actually was recognized a number of years ago when I worked for IBM by LinkedIn as their #1 social seller worldwide for IBM amongst its employees. And that's a combination of not just brand, but engagement on the platform, engagement with my network, et cetera. And IBM had me develop the training for other IBM executives in terms of how to build their strength around brand. And that's where I spent a lot more time now coaching not only peers, but then outside of the community, my work community, and added it to even the list of keynotes that I deliver. And I just had a book come out on the topic. And the reason I decided to actually pen it all down is I'm in career transition from my own C-suite executive career. And I spent a lot more time on LinkedIn, and I'm seeing people post, and there's gamification of the algorithm within LinkedIn and otherwise. And, people asking for likes and comments and engagement. And don't see a clear brand strategy. And so I just asked the question to a few people, like, well, why are you doing this? Is it, again, you want to go viral? Do you want to become a thought leader? And so I'm like, you know what? I'd like to put it out there in the world that I think that there's a different way to be thinking about branding. And I see most people stall at the first of 4 sort of key elements that I see. And that is, what you do, your subject matter expertise, what you went to school for, the job function you're in, the industry, you know the best. And that's just foundational. But there's many people who do what we do in our subsects.
It doesn't distinguish you very much, just that.
Yeah, exactly. And you actually said a very, important word, distinguish. And so for me, you need to extend beyond the what you do and subject matter expertise into a little bit of storytelling. Who are you as a whole human? What lived experiences do you have? What are your interests, passions, and values? So those need to come out. The next step is, how are you different from others? And to some extent, the storytelling, lived experience, and differentiation are completely intertwined. But
Mm,
I would want people to approach it with strategic intentionality around the development of their brand. And again, brand, this is you curating the narrative of like, and not letting other people do that for you. What do they say about you in the room? You want to help develop that. And so
right.
when you think about differentiation, it's then, who's your target audience? And you shouldn't try and go peanut butter spread for everyone. Figure out who the audience is, and then who's like you in the space, who are your competitors, and then you start to lean into what makes you different. And then the last piece in this is legacy and impact. What do you want to be known for? So I don't know about you, Tom, but for me, I think about now that I'm a lot older, what I wanted in my 20s and as I was an executive is very different than where I am now in my late 40s. And although I've been really successful from a corporate perspective, I've got nicknames like the Turnaround Queen. That's actually not what I would want to go on my proverbial tombstone. I want it to
Mm,
be about the fact that I am an advocate for social equity and justice and diversity, equity, inclusion, that I was a whole human leader, operated very differently. And I left the workplaces, community, and world a better place when I left it than when I came into it. And I also raised two really good humans. And so
mm.
start with the end in mind and kind of build into those four foundational areas.
Well, you put a whole lot of clay on the table there, that's for
I know, I
sure.
figured I would just go all out and
That's
then
good.
I will shut up and let you ask some questions.
No, that's great. And just to review and be clear, so you start with the what, and that has a way of focusing us in. Um, and then the storytelling with the interests, passions, and values that gets us connected to more of our authenticity, perhaps starting to open up the book as to why we do what we do. Is that, am I getting that
It,
right?
it, yeah, I think well, it's a combination of a couple things. So it should get at your why. And so that comes through things like values and some lived experience. That's your why, but also it's it's the hook. Like people do business with people they like and they trust and they want to do business with. And so I think it took me years ago, I was asked to take over a really troubled client portfolio. And the most senior woman client contact who ran a majority of the portfolio, I couldn't get in front of her.
Mm,
My hook, we're hockey moms. And so shared, I mean, lots of time spent in hockey arenas with our kids, but it was that shared interest, if you will, that initial and connecting in a very different way that led to a business relationship that became incredibly fruitful. And so just thinking about it that way, but when you're seeing, through your social media feed stuff coming up, like if you see someone it's not just like work content, they're not just sharing about an article from or marketing collateral from work, but they're talking about something that's much more personal. That's what goes, oh, it's a spark. That's the hook. And so it's important for people to share that.
you said spark, and I was just thinking about the phrase, set yourself on fire and people come to watch you burn. The idea of being passionate and feeding that part of ourselves, whatever it might be, right?
Yeah, exactly. And figure that out. One thing I didn't say also about these foundations, these are the four foundational elements, but I believe there's what I refer to as the three acts of engagement. If you're going to do this, you need to be courageous, you need to be vulnerable, and you need to be authentic. And the authenticity part, so yes, you want a hook, you want eyeballs on you and you want attention, but it needs to be incredibly authentic and connected to who you are as a human being. As much as I talk about curating or developing the narrative around your brand, it needs to be incredibly authentic to who you are, both IRL, as my young one would say, in real life, as well as your digital presence. I mean, when you meet me, there's no different version of Victoria. Now, there's some stuff I'm going to post on LinkedIn that I'm going to not post, or that I wouldn't, or on my personal Instagram feed that I wouldn't post on LinkedIn. But
Right.
I'm also aware
There's situational awareness still
there
comes to
there
play.
is. But
Yeah.
again, it's all the same version of Victoria.
Yeah.
Very authentic me.
So to me, that the word I use to describe that is congruence, right? You're everything lines up and pushes in the same direction or pulls in the same direction. And you're not surprising people by, wait a minute, that seemed incongruent, right?
Right.
So that part of the passion, I think, does that to some degree because we're putting energy towards something and it has that sort of aligning um, effect to it, doesn't it? And isn't that one of the things that passion does for us? It helps us get clear and get us focused.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I think a caveat a bit to that is if you are like so myopically focused around a passion that you want to pursue, you could be showing up online exclusively kind of representing that topic, and without thinking about how you talk about the topic. And so this is where there's this, again, strategic intentionality, a phrase I love to
Hmm.
think about. So there's passion, and that will should come out, but at the same time, the passion needs to be like if you're incredibly focused on if you're in on what AI means right now and everything you post is about that, so you need to make it again personal, and more about who's Tom the human that's so deeply interested in AI and why and how's that connected to other things.
Yeah, and I suppose there's a little bit of a spectrum, right? Some people are very focused on one thing, and that has an advantage, right? I go further in that one direction. But if I have a little bit of a wider frame or I'm a little bit more versatile, I can bring different elements to that same thing, or I can connect with a wider range of people, a wider audience, a wider range of situations. So
Yeah.
maybe it's not necessarily, I mean, you probably go back to what's real and true inside for you, right? And letting that live and have respect. And that gets into that strategic intention about how you're different too, right?
Right.
Because a lot of times people, especially in our early days, we are looking to belong, conform, not be ridiculed, not be bullied, not be judged, not be excluded, right? And so we're we learn to see those things that are different about ourselves as liabilities as kids too often, right? So that's something that we have to navigate past and embrace. Would you see it that way?
Yeah, 100%. It's important to recognize that like our brand and the way we show up is going to evolve and change over time. For some of the reasons you said, we're going to gain confidence in what we used to feel as a hindrance or,
Mm,
the being an other, to then as we mature recognizing that it becomes a superpower and you're like prepared to share that. But also the things we want, whether it's on a personal or professional side, very much also evolve and change. And so we're be incredibly comfortable that it will evolve. And I think of my own personal example. I had to make a very conscious pivot in that my early years and lived experience, had me sort of create walls to protect myself. And
mm,
as a young female executive, plus my lived experience, I showed up, never showing vulnerability, never showing emotion. I'm not going to give anyone a reason to question me and why I have my seat at the table. So I found out I had a nickname as of the Iron Maiden.
mm.
So highly effective in delivering business results, but I suspect my team feared me and not followed me. And that's not innately who I am. Like I'm all
Right.
marshmallow inside. I cry at Humane Society commercials,
I
but
got a warm, gooey interior.
yes, my nickname is Turtle for that very reason. My best friend calls me that. Really tough exterior, I can handle a lot, but just all soft and mushy on the inside. And so for me, my brand had to change. I was afraid. I would never have told my lived experience, the trauma I had that informed kind of the way I protected myself. And the fact that as the only woman, I was 20 plus years younger than most of my peers, et cetera. I
Yeah,
showed up.
you were a COO at 24, is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so
And
that's pretty young for that kind of
yeah, it is. It
responsibility.
is. And so I think as I matured and I gained confidence, not only in my seat at the table, as I literally matured and finally, like I was similar ages to others. And also as I gained confidence in who I was, I even arguably, I'll say, loved myself a little bit more.
Mm,
I was okay to bring the walls down. And so I had to show up in a way that made me uncomfortable. So walking into a meeting, doing small talk, by the way, I'm A-type personality. I jumped into the agenda all the time. Slow that down. Let me build authentic relationships with people. Let me share more of myself, and show up in person. And then the online part, right? We're talking about almost 20 years ago. So like online was a little less of a factor then, but then much more. So I had to make that change. And some of it was very deliberate through maturity, confidence. and recognizing that like the experiences I had that I didn't want to tell people because they're very different from others are actually a big part of my why and a big part of what fuels me going forward. And so then it's become so powerful to share it.
It's a happier place without those walls, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It is.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let's go. Maybe might be a good time to shift towards. 'Cause you mentioned sort of a different world now than it was 20 years ago, and you're a forward looker. You're looking at what things are, where they're going, and so you have some thoughts to share about the workforce of the future and the direction of, I guess you call it, whole human leadership. So I'd like to get into those topics and see where that takes us.
Yeah,
So
yeah, happy to. I've a big part of my career has been leading very large teams. I usually leading operations and commercial functions, and that's where like 80% of the headcount often sits. And so I've had lots of hands-on experience. I've been through 18 mergers and acquisitions.
wow.
The companies I worked for, probably another 20 with clients I've supported. And I've been often leading outsourcing based organizations as well, where you're mess for less, and so you look at automation and different processes and things like that. So and then I shifted maybe not quite 10 years ago to running human capital businesses where I'm consulting and delivering services for other companies workforces. And so that's given me a lot of insight into the workforce and where companies are moving, and how they need to be thinking differently, everything from leading with purpose, in that organizations need to be really clear on their purpose and living it. So not just a fancy like vision mission statement around that on the wall.
Yeah.
And then as leaders, it's our role to bring that down to the individual level and let them understand how the work that they do, what purpose it has in contributing to, the overarching organizational purpose, or maybe
Can we
societal, depending on what it is.
can we drill into that just a little bit?
Mhm.
Because I find when I go into organizations, it's all too common that we see the mission or the values on the wall. And when I ask people what they are who work there, it's shocking at how few people can actually say what they see, the words that they see every day. It's not even top of mind aware. So where I'd like to drill down there is how does a leader effectively go from the saying to the living it and having that really be the walk culturally?
Well, so that becomes another act of courage, I actually believe in many instances, in that sadly, I incentives drive behavior. I mean, that's a reality. And
Yeah.
so what I see is this misalignment between the stated organizational values and the metrics within the business, and the incentives behind those. And so then it drives a different kind of behavior. And so the
Mm.
courageousness comes for people who are going to say, no, I'm going to do the right thing. And I often will remind leader, like doing the right thing doesn't mean you need to trade off for strong business performance and meeting the objectives of your stakeholders to do the right thing. In fact, if you do the right thing in terms of a very different leadership style, in terms of focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and moving the needle forward, in terms of being bold and saying no to work or activities that don't align back to values, that actually drives stronger engagement, both from customers, if you're sharing it, some of the things externally, but from an employee perspective. And when employees are happy, productive, engaged, their productivity goes up. So you see top line improvement and often bottom line as well, because there's less turnover. Not only does productivity stay higher, there's greater problem solving and less risk associated in the business. And so that's just a mindset shift that has to change. But I encourage companies to look at the incentive models as well and what they measure, and look at some different facets of what they measure to get a more holistic view of culture and outcomes that aren't just purely like about sales and revenue and profit.
Right, right. The one of the dynamics that I think is a challenge in today's world is where, and it really accelerated with the lockdowns from the pandemic, is remote work, and people, communicating like you and I are communicating now, which works, right? We're having a conversation, we feel connected to some degree, but it's not the same thing as if we're physically proximate. So we have lots of cultures that were born on that. So we all work at this place, and now we're transitioning to this. I could work with anybody, anywhere, at any time, doesn't matter. And so that's putting some strains, I think, on some of the paradigms of culture that we've adopted for so long. What's your view on those challenges and what leaders might do about them?
I think you're right. There's this just incredible shift that's coming. The pendulum swung and it's trying to swing back, but the reality is I think employees want it to be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah,
And so I think there's a need for a hybrid work environment for a number of reasons. One of the other ways we need to be looking at the future workforce is looking more finitely at skills and where can we find that skill? In which case you do, and now you've got the globe. You don't
yeah,
need to be
that's the
bound,
advantage.
right? So for sure. Um, but you know, I think there's a number of employee. I don't like the headlines that we all heard of, like the Great Resignation and quiet quitting, but that's the sentiment that was coming out. And a big part of it, we see this backlash now from companies who are saying, "Hey, we have to be 100% back in the office." Well, a lot of that is, well, put real estate cost of real estate aside, there's a lack of trust. And so for
Mhm.
many leaders still, it's like, I need to see bums and seats. That doesn't equate to deliverables and productivity and outcomes. So we need to demonstrate that we can trust our teams. And there's literally some jobs that don't need to be sitting in the office full time. But the hybrid environment, I think, is critically important because the creativity and innovation that flows when you get together. And I mean, it's proven, like the pheromones, and I'm not talking about like for sexual attraction here, but just
No,
in
it's human connection.
in being with people and looking in the whites of one another's eyes, not through Zoom, but
Yeah.
like literally sitting in person, like that also helps build that connection and trust with one another. And we know that people don't leave companies, they leave leaders, they leave their teams. And so if we're together in person, like it's a lot harder to do that. So I do think hybrid is the way of the future, with leaders who are really clear. And I've had a phrase for a long time, well before COVID, and it was, there are no schedules, there's just deliverables.
Yeah.
And so you've never had to ask me for permission to work remotely, or to leave early. I mean, some exceptions, right? If we have a client deliverable or a client meeting at a certain time, like that's non-negotiable, but otherwise giving them lots of flexibility around that. So I think to be really successful, we're going to need to create much more of the hybrid environment. So like when we're hiring people, although the globe is accessible to us now, still trying to get people within a certain radius of an office so you can bring people together.
So not completely abandoning the fact that we have to be really humanly connected is part,
Exactly.
you see that as part of the workforce of the future,
Oh, I
and
do.
not and so what are some other elements that you would describe when you talk about the workplace of the future, Victoria?
Well, so I said purpose. We've talked
Yep.
about sort of the where the work gets done. A really, really big one is the way in which we need to look. I mentioned skills. That we need to look at skills. And this somewhat connects also to diversity and inclusion as well. And so I think the role of HR should be the strategic business advisor to the business leaders, not the transactional activities. I mean, that can be handled in an HR contact center, but truly strategic advisor, where we do a look at our 3 and our 5 year strategic plan, married up with what new products, services, et cetera, we delivering, and what's going to be required to deliver those, and then break that down into the functional skills that are going to be required, and doing an analysis of and like a really tough look in the mirror, to be honest, around what skills do we have within the organization today, and how are we going to bridge to where we're going in that 3 year strategy. And do we build the talent by developing it in-house? Are we going to go and buy it? Do we borrow it through contingent labor? Is it automated through bots? Like looking at all of that. But also it means challenging the way we think about how to get those skills and where to get those skills. And by that, we don't necessarily all need 4 year degrees. You're seeing more and more companies moving away from that, and maybe just certifications on certain things. But the
Right.
other big one is around um, potential. And it's hits hard at like the whole diversity piece. And a really good example, at least from a gender perspective, women typically do not apply for a promotion or a new job unless they believe they meet 9 or 10 out of the 10 requisite skills listed. Men do it at 5 or 6.
I thought you were going to say three or two or three or four.
Well, maybe. And actually, when we look at like,
Hey, I could do that.
when we look at,
and the funny thing is neither one is necessarily wrong. It's just a different framework of how you're approaching it,
right.
right? Yeah.
And so I truly believe, and I've embraced this very much as a leader, that's incumbent upon me. So I hire, whether it's even as a sponsor to become a sponsor for someone, or whenever I'm looking at hiring or promoting someone, with people who've had solid performance and, in the roles that they've been in, but much more on potential. So if someone only meets 7 out of 10, but I see incredible potential, great work ethic, good fit, all these other things, then it's my job as the leader to bridge the gap to get them to 10. And so whether that's identifying the training, or maybe it's coaching for me, whatever it is. And what comes with that, often it's a very, diverse and rich experience, whether it's lived experience, in different geographies, or it's all the other elements of diversity. We think like the richest that comes together, but bringing that, and this is where actually you see incredible things like happen. And so I think I'm saddened to see things like some of the affirmative action things that have been removed, here in the US over the last couple of years, because the needle's still so far from where it needs to go. But this is where I'm encouraging leaders to think very differently, again, around skills. How do you get it? How do you build it? And how do you find it in talent you wouldn't have necessarily thought of? There, the unseen potentially talent.
Generally speaking, when I'm thinking of skills, there's various instruments that we can use in the workplace that have maybe a standard list of soft skills or whatever, and generally people have a basket of them, and the basket is in different proportions, and what their potential is may be hard to measure in one way, but you can see it in another way. So I'm a big fan of using multi-sciences when I'm using any psychometrics for that reason. But the bottom line, as far as uh, what a person views about themselves, is most we make errors of two kinds. One where we way overestimate how good we are at something or how developed we are at something, and another is how way underdeveloped we are in something else. Um, so what's your view as it relates to helping people have a better I like the idea that earlier when you were saying that courage, because to me it's honesty and courage that's the foundation of really all virtues, because you have to be able to look in the mirror and see what you really see. And it's only those vulnerabilities, those fears that keep us, so we're looking in a fun house mirror rather than the actual mirror. So what's your view as it relates to helping people see those things more clearly in themselves?
I adopt the title of Kim Scott's book, Radical Candor.
Radical
I feel
candor.
like I've always been operating that way, but once I read her book, I'm like, the vernacular is right there. I'm like, that's perfect. That also takes courage. So
It does.
to do that, it's uncomfortable to have those conversations, and but that's required, and that's also a learned skill, how to deliver the feedback, again, with the care and compassion, so people accept and receive it from a place of understanding that it's helping them, progress their careers forward. But I do think that's really important. And as an individual who might be had the blinders on, I think it's important to seek out mentors and other people, trusted individuals that are going to give you that feedback. Because it might be, as you said, sort of in a very different mirror that you're looking through. And so, um, asking for feedback, which in itself, by the way, so another act of courage is to ask for feedback, or to say, I don't know what I don't know. Like, can you share with me? And so I think it's two-way street, both in terms of the employee, but also the leader, to be sharing really openly and candidly.
The that look in the mirror, that no matter how we, how courageous we are, no matter how honest we are with ourselves, I think at least best I can tell is we're still going to have blind spots. And so I don't think we can reach our full potential without other people. And I actually think that's a beautiful thing because I think we actually do need each other.
Yeah,
You
we
see it
do.
that way?
Oh, I do. Absolutely. I listen to a lot of audio books. So I work out every morning and start with like a news update podcast and then podcasts or audiobooks. And so I finished listening to Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and actually I'm currently listening to the Jeff Bezos one. And so
Okay.
all very similar leadership types and hugely successful in within their organizations, but that leadership is not going to work for the future. I get startups and getting to a certain point, but then when you start to think about scale and grow, and I know that they're not a great example because all three of them have like had huge success in very large organizations. Um, but you know, yes,
As disruptors.
disruptors, yes,
Yeah.
as those who are, like, I actually think like I think about legacy going back to brand, like that's not how I want to be known as a leader.
Mm.
Um, and I want to be the person that people need, and I do the reach out directly, and I think more and more, that's what like the workforce of the future want as well. Now I jokingly say like I've got Gen Zers, who got awards just for showing up. And they're like they want something very very different in terms
Yeah,
of
there's a little work to do, but that's true with every generation.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think, and this is why, like, that humanity in work, like, it's not as much as AI is going to, change the way in which we're working. What gets left behind, one is like the complex stuff that requires complex problem solving and the engagement with customers and colleagues, the human skills. But again, we're always going to, do business with people we like and trust and want to do business with. So we need, going back to hybrid environment, like we need one another.
I think that's true, and I sure hope it's true because I don't. It's funny. Over the past couple weeks, I've encountered a few businesses that are trying to lean heavily on AI and innovation, such as like an AI coaching uh,
Mm.
um, company. And it's like, hey, I use ChatGPT as a sounding board, and I get it. You can get some things that you otherwise might not think of. So there isn't zero value there. But to think of an AI as your coach or your intimate partner or something like that, where they're going to be able to play you, they're going to be able to psychologically manipulate for sure. Um, but is that going to reach the soul level, which we ultimately get meaning and connection and what we at the end of the day value? I don't know about that part. What's your view there as far as the workplace of the future and where that's
Um,
going?
I mean, I most definitely think that um, AI is going to play a much, much more significant role. I mean, if this last year with like the rise of ChatGPT and how we're now seeing it all, and everyone building their own kind of Gen AI and GPT, tools, like hasn't convinced people that it's going to change, like then I don't know what rock they're under. So it will
Yeah.
for sure. And it's funny, there's a couple of movies that came out years ago before GPT, right? That was, I can't remember the one with Joaquin Phoenix, even where like he falls in love with a robot, like this kind of
Oh,
thing.
yeah, I know what you're talking. Her.
Is that what it's called? I can't remember. I saw it, but I
I
can't remember
think
the
it's
title.
her. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's her.
And I actually, it was yesterday's, like the day, I think it was the Daily Podcast or the Wall Street Journal podcast. There was a technology leader who he lost his mom suddenly, and he took the last like 30 texts he had from his mother and plugged it into Chat GPT and said, and the prompt was that he didn't get to say goodbye.
Oh my
Could
God, I'm gonna
he
start
have
crying.
GPT? I know it was, he said, could he have GPT respond as his mother? And he said it was scary and he was instantly crying because
Wow.
it learned and it engaged in it with him using like her words from everything he'd fed it. And so I think there's going to be people who do that, but at some point that will fail. That's a temporary measure. That's a nice band-aid for a moment, make you feel good. But like to sustain that kind of thing, we're going to need to look to very different ways. But I think people are going to try. I think we're going to see more of that, whether it's the dog robots or different, human ones that will be in our household. I think people will look to that to create a little bit of that bond and connection, but ultimately it's not going to satisfy.
Yeah, I mean, we've sort of seen in stages how it goes. I mean, when I was a kid, there were such things as pet rocks. Right? So people can attach to things. And we had when my kids were little, they had little robotic things that were semi-interactive and nothing compared to what's available now, I'm sure, and that's only going to accelerate. And then as it relates to a customer service function of some kind, the bar is continually going up, right? It's so what that means is going to put pressure on the productivity of human beings, right? I've got to be able to provide something beyond what this thing that's free that doesn't get tired or need a paycheck. I've got to I've got to beat that by a certain amount to be employable, and that bar is going to move. And I think we're going to enter an area. I had a podcast a couple of weeks ago where and it was based on things that people were saying that they expect a century's worth of change, societal change in the next 4 years to build on what you just pointed to. So so this podcast, I actually look back, okay, what a century, what does that mean? So I look back to what the 1920s were. We didn't have refrigerators. The first commercial refrigerator was 1927.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, like all these things, it's insane. And so if it's anywhere close to true that we're going to have that level of change over such a short period of time, it's talk about disruptive. Holy smokes! To me, I go back and I think we're singing the same song here, where it comes back to the human equation. It comes back to being authentically connected to people in a shared enterprise that matters, that gives value and allows people to be seen for the individual they are. And I think that's the thing that's the place we all must turn to. I think we're in the same way. Does that jive with what you talk about, like the whole human leadership idea?
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah,
whole human leadership is recognized in that we are whole humans that show up at work every day. Our ability to park at the door, what happened to us on the weekend, or the baggage from the lived experience we've had in the past, it shows up with us every day.
yeah.
And so one recognizing that and creating a safe space where people feel like they can show up. Now, you know, again, there's some things you might not want to share in that context, but having a leader who one demonstrates that, and this comes from the top, who demonstrates the safe space by being vulnerable themselves, by talking openly about things, so so employees recognize, oh, like I can do that too, and creating that sense of belonging, that's critically important. Other
Mm.
elements of whole human leadership include some of the things I talked about earlier in terms of authenticity. Again, I already said vulnerability. For me, and truth be told, I'm also just a massive advocate from a DEI perspective, diversity, but that also means looking for the unseen employees, the ones that are usually underrepresented minorities in the workplace. Um, but the great potential that comes with them is another part of that. Transparency in our communication is a huge one. In
So
fact,
I don't
sorry,
want to
go ahead.
interrupt you, but my guess is then probably one of your most satisfying experiences would be finding sort of that hidden gem or that unpolished person that gets developed and blossoms that you're able to see either help get a chance or see them get a chance, whatever. I'm guessing that's one of your sort of peak things you like to see. Am I
For,
right there?
for sure. So my definition of success early in my career was around hierarchy and challenge and greater compensation. Now for me, it's exactly, Tom, as you just said it. Like, what can I do for employees? Where can I recognize that? How can I help develop people and move to the next level? I one of the books I've written for this year, it'll come out later. I tell a story of this unseen employee, and it was like he is a retired Canadian football player. And the CFL they do not have the same salaries at all as NFL players. I've been
Right.
like, he coached me on it. And so he'd retired after winning 2 Grey Cup rings, like, that's like winning the Super Bowl. But he had to provide for his family, and he was working in a contact center. And here's this huge hulking man that everyone's sort of afraid of, but like him on the phone, like his ability to connect and engage with people. He was so wonderful. And actually, I don't think I would have gotten to know him. Interestingly, my ex-wife actually worked in the call center. I worked on a different area, and I was asked to come in and kind of help fix some things. And this is why she was telling me all about him, and I had the opportunity to connect with him on this human level. I'm like, Donovan's amazing. And years later, and I just saw him continue to flourish, but in that environment, years later at a different company, I had the opportunity to hire an account manager who would manage the contact center operations on behalf of other clients. The thing he had on paper, none of those skills, other than having worked in a contact center. But the stuff you can't teach, the way he problem solved, the way he engaged with people. And I knew that there was a couple of really difficult clients. And so I gave him that chance. And he did so exceptionally well. And he's now ready for retirement in that second half of his career in the same field and industry in which I gave him this opportunity. And,
I love it.
that for me, I look back on that and just, it makes me warm and fuzzy to
That's
know that.
awesome.
Yeah.
And to me, one of the uglier things we see in the world is, for lack of a better word to call it, is sort of an elitist attitude where you think because you are more educated, because you have higher IQ, because you earn more money, because your parents earned more money, because you whatever, fill in the blank, that somehow puts you above another human being, and it's just not true. Now,
No.
there's character different. There's people that are more developed, more mature character-wise, and, if you wanna compare that way, I guess we can, but every person's an actual human being, right? So, they have their basket of goodies, and only they have that basket, right? And it all has utility, and that whatever it is, it deserves, at the very minimum, respect.
Yeah.
And that's what I don't like about elitist attitudes, where it's just so disrespectful. And without respect, you've got really no way to connect with another human being.
I agree. I agree. And I mean, I'm the type who you've earned my trust and respect until it's lost.
Yeah.
So I come into each of those relationships that way, which I think is important. I mean, assume good intent.
Yeah. I mean, it can, because sometimes, the stray dog will bite you. You know, sometimes, but if you give up the first time, then okay, it's over. But sometimes the best relationships are, okay, I look past that. And then, you do actually get that to happen. I'm reminded of an experience that I had where I was a big brother to boy who he was 11, or I think he was 10 or 11 when we started a relationship, and it lasted a few years. And we had an experience where we were on vacation. I brought him on vacation with my family, and extended family. We're all at a lake house and all that. And he ended up stealing some money, not a lot of money, but it
Mm.
was the money of one of my cousins. And he wasn't much older than this boy was. And that was a hard thing for me. I had to learn to sort of look past that, but I gotta say, I wish I'd been better at looking past it now, because he's just 11-year-old kid. You know, it, it, it can be hard. It can take a lot to do that. I guess you need a lot of love in your heart to really puts your arm around a person that is a, perhaps you see him as a threat to you.
Yeah. Well, that's a big difference for me in business. I don't well, in business and life, but like people aren't threats for me. I actually want to surround myself with people who are smarter than me, have like experiences that I don't have. Again, I think that like that, so I don't ever view anyone as a threat. Like amazing. You've got this experience and it's clear you're smarter than me on this top. Like great. Like I'm gonna tap you like when we need to bring that in. But and same thing on the personal side as well. Like I'm not intimidated by anyone. And maybe that's me. I've been told I'm intimidating. And I'm like,
Mm.
why? Like, and but yet I'm also a big believer in like giving second chances. Like we all make mistakes. And so much like even in business, it's how do you recover? I don't expect perfection at all. We are far from that. But and I'm more loyal actually, I think, to there's, some companies I bought from who've messed up but recovered exceptionally well. That's created exceptional loyalty for me. But even the same thing at a human to human level. I'm not talking even business consumer now, like human to human. And so if there's an acknowledgement for the error or the wrongdoing that someone's made, and ideally an apology, for it as well, like, okay, let's move on. It's clean slate to the extent that there can be, like, clean slate. Let's move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the word that comes to mind for that is just grace, really. I mean, it's just being a little graceful and a little bit understanding that, hey, none of us is perfect, and if anybody was perfect, they wouldn't want to be around here. And when you are perfect, I think your work's done here. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, so well, I think we've covered quite a lot of ground here today,
Yes.
Victoria. Very much appreciate talking with you today. Thanks for your time, and I wish you well. And you said you're a little bit of a nexus there, so you've got the future is going to be bright, but you don't know exactly what form it's going to take at the moment, right?
Yeah, that's right. Although I'm not good at idols, I've kept myself super busy during this time. But yeah, who
Yeah,
knows?
writing
2024 is
books,
going to
giving
hold.
speeches.
Yes, exactly. Write 2 books, doing speeches, doing some coaching. So my husband jokes that he thinks I'm busier in my unemployment than when I was unemployed. But 2024 will be amazing. I do know that.
That's awesome. And the book that you wrote that just came out is what title is it again?
It's called Influence Unleashed: Forging a
Influence.
Lasting Legacy Through Personal Branding. And then the
Okay.
one that will come out in the summertime is Whole Human Leadership.
Whole human leadership. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, those listening, if you like what we've been talking about, you want to learn more and take a deeper dive, please go ahead and I'll have the link to you on the podcast page, so people will be able to easily find those resources. So, thanks
Amazing.
again, Victoria. Appreciate it so much.
Thanks, Tom. It was a pleasure.
Thanks again, Victoria. Appreciate our time together today. Just a couple of highlights for me to wrap up. Really liked her ideas on the workplace of the future and what that looked like. And I think we were singing the same song as it relates to it's as technology advances, as we get more automation and AI's capacities start blurring the lines between what a human can do and what a machine can do and what's acceptable as it relates to that. I think it's all going to point towards human connection and mutual respect, individual respect, uh, making sure people aren't left behind. Victoria's clearly passionate about those things, and I applaud that giving and loving attitude. I think the more we have that in the world, the better the world's going to be. We talked in the beginning. We talked a little bit about the human, our personal brand, and she had 4 components of that, looking at not just what we do, that's number one, and obviously that gets us into the specifics. What kind of subject matter expert are we? What's our resume, our the skills and the capacities and the insights that we can bring to the table. Um, but also number 2 is the storytelling element, right? So that's the communication. It starts getting into the why. So we're now into interests, passions, values, right? So this is the human element of our own personal story. Um, and then taking number 3 there is, how are you different? So in other words, what's our unique element because nobody's walked the walk that you have, I have, no person has. So we all have a unique story in that way. And developing that seems to me to be a pretty good strategy. So I got to agree with her there. And then finally was legacy and impact. So we didn't talk as much about that, but what I take from that is that sort of begin with the end in mind. And that might shift. Victoria talked about how things have shifted for her over the few decades that she's been in the professional world. But and so it can be a moving target, but to have a target, to have something you're shooting for, and then that allows us to be strategic in the other elements of putting together our personal brand. And she she also mentioned the idea of 3 acts of engagement: courageous, vulnerable, and authentic. And we talk about that. Obviously, we have the 4 capacities. One of them is courage in the pain quadrant. Um, I think authentic is very much related to what we call congruency in the perception quadrant. So these things are very much related to what we talk about in the Eye of Power. Hey, truth is truth, right? It doesn't matter what model you use. We just need to continually work to clarify our understanding and move in the direction that we know is going to allow us to be more of the author of our story, have more agency in the world, throw off those things that hold us back. And leaders who can help other people do that, very valuable, and such a pleasure to have Victoria on the show and be one of those leaders that really can help people not just do the job they're hired for, but become more of the person that they're made to be. And there's no higher calling. So thanks once again, Victoria. Thank you for being with us. This has been the Eye of Power podcast with Tom Dardick. I'd like to thank you for listening. I'd also like to thank my brother, Scott Dardick, for the music and his music production. If you'd like to reach me, simply email Tom at dardickcommunications.com